Thanks. Here's the safe harbor, which you may or may not have seen already today. I may talk about some things that we're going to go on, talk about do in the future. However, so my name is Mike, and thanks first of all to the organizers for inviting me to present this session. I'll be talking about embedding Oracle Analytics into websites, custom applications, Oracle Apex, Oracle VBCS. So kind of pretty much wherever you want to, you can take the content that you've generated in Oracle Analytics and then put that somewhere else. Okay, so here is what we call the Oracle Sandbox, the Oracle Analytics Sandbox. And this is a great resource where our community have uploaded, created and uploaded some content which demonstrates the kind of visualizations that you can do with Oracle Analytics. So we have lots of really cool examples of analysis, data storytelling, and one of the things that people always want to do is to say, well, that's great, but I need to include those visualizations somewhere else. Now that could either be a custom web page, it could be a corporate portal or an application if you're an ISV, or you may want to take the content from Oracle Analytics and embed that into a third-party cloud application, which allows you to do that kind of embedding. So it's, in summary, embedded analytics is taking the content from Oracle Analytics and then embedding that seamlessly into somewhere else. And the focus is on consumption and essentially using the content. So this isn't about creating new content. This is about making available content that you've already generated somewhere else. So it's letting users do their job, with the data that they need without having to worry about generating a query. One example is we've been working with manufacturers who have an application that runs on the manufacturing floor. They've done some analytics within Oracle Analytics, and they want to make those results and those visualizations available to the folks who are working on the manufacturing floor. So what they would then do is take the content from analytics and then embed that into that existing application. So that's kind of just one kind of real world example of embedding analytic content. Another example is we have a partner who has built their own application, and they're bringing data from, I think at the last count, it was around 15 sources, all being surfaced through Oracle Content and Experience Cloud. They are doing the analytics within Oracle Analytics and then embedding that content into OCE. So that then provides a single portal which their customers can then see all that content in a single place. Now, some of the great things that you can do are essentially create a customized consumer experience for that content. So within Oracle Analytics, we have talking about the DV side, the data visualization side specifically within this session. And the user experience is you create a data set or a connection, you create a data set, and then you would analyze that content, and then you can view that in a narrate mode. The idea of being able to embed that content somewhere else gives you a completely blank page in terms of the user experience that you want to offer your end users. And that can be great if you're an ISV wanting to build a custom application, or if you wanted to, for example, enable access to data on a public basis. So you could have a website and have automatic authentication to OAC behind the scenes. And we'll talk a little about how you can do that later on in the session. So there's a number of use cases that embedding analytics now allows you to perform. Okay, so we found out what it is and some of the use cases. So how do you actually do the embedding of the analytics content? So we have a kind of a low-code approach. You create the project within Oracle Analytics with the various sort of data visualizations that tell the story of your data. And then there's a reference within there where you can take a few lines of HTML and JavaScript code from the project properties and then paste that into your target environment. So what do you need to get started? So you need an analytics instance, and as I said, with a project that's been created. Basic, right through to advanced web development skills. So basic skills would, for example, I define as like HTML. If you've got an idea of how you can create a simple HTML page, then you'll be able to embed some content into a simple web page and host that wherever you like. Then as you go through the kind of complexity with respect to the skills, you can then start to build more complex applications and web pages where you're embedding that content. So things such as CSS for the look and how it will kind of look and feel, JavaScript if you want to have some interactivity. In terms of troubleshooting and getting the setup configured, an understanding of web security can be useful, but we give you the steps that you need to go through when registering what to call a safe domain. And then on the kind of more advanced level, if you understand technologies such as Knockout and jQuery, then that will give you a much better understanding of the more complex types of embedding scenarios. Getting yourself a good development environment and text editor is vital. I've been using Visual Studio Code and Atom. There are loads of different IDEs out there. There's Brackets, there's any number of text editors. But what's important is that you have something which allows you to view the code and gives you some formatting of that code. So when you're troubleshooting, for instance, a medium level complexity system, it can be very useful if the text for your code is highlighted appropriately and it understands where you have pairs of like curly brackets and things like that. So that can save hours and hours and hours of time. So those two things are kind of very useful. For development and testing of your embedded system, and this comes back to the web security side. So something called CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, is if you're taking content from one website and embedding it into another, that can be fraught with difficulty from a security perspective, because you could embed some malicious JavaScript for whatever within your target website. So CORS looks out for this and it protects you. What that means is that you need to tell each of the systems that they are able to do that embedding. So within Oracle Analytics Cloud, we have something called the safe domains. And what it also means is when you're developing your web page, you cannot just sort of write a HTML page and then open that from the file system. You need to host that either on a development web server or, for example, a lightweight HTTP server that you've got running locally. You would then need to register that within your safe domains within Oracle Analytics Cloud or Oracle Analytics Server if you happen to be using that version. So that's just kind of something to be aware of. You need to run it from some sort of web server. You can't just open up the file from the file system when doing development and moving through the testing. Obviously in a production environment, you'll be running that on a web server. Depending on what web server you're running, so I've seen some cases where people may be running IIS locally on a laptop, and because that is, quite a sophisticated web server, then that may require some configuration locally for CORS. So if you're having issues when running IIS locally to do your development, then make sure that you have all the CORS settings set locally, because that may be something that you may not consider until you start seeing issues. As you get through the progression of the embedding experience, get to know the developer tools console in your browser. It can be that you've created something and you open it up within your browser from your local host and you don't see anything. So the developer tools can be extremely useful, especially the console, for seeing any kind of back-end warnings or error messages. So there would be the case if you didn't set up your CORS configuration with your safe domains, then if you open up the console within your web browser, you will potentially see warnings or errors within there. And again, that can be kind of helpful for troubleshooting. Also, the private mode can be useful for testing on your browser. So that will kind of give you a clean environment where you may not have any cookies left over from an existing Oracle Analytics session that's running on that browser. So that can be good just to open up a private mode browser for quick testing. And knowledge of Oracle IDCS can then also become useful when configuring some of the security aspects. So we'll talk a bit more about this later, but depending on how you've chosen to do authentication into Oracle Analytics, you may need some kind of knowledge about token-based authentication. All right, so for let's see how this works. So for a basic embedding use case, if you like, it's the hello world of Oracle Analytics embedding. Here I have a screenshot. These are all screenshots of Oracle Analytics, and if I navigate to my developer menu option, I will then see this UI, which shows me the information that I then need to put into my web page. So the first thing that we have is the link, which takes us through to our embedding.js file. And this is all the JavaScript code. It's our JavaScript framework, which allows you to do the embedding. For those of you who are familiar with Oracle's development kind of technologies, Oracle data visualization is built using the Oracle Jet framework, and our embedding component is essentially based around the web component side of Oracle Jet. So what we have got here is the link, the reference that we need for embedding.js, and we then have the project path. So these are the two main components that we need to include within our web page when we do the embedding. So here we have now switched over to a quick look at a HTML page. And as I said, this is like the hello world of embedding your analytics. So we've got the link, which we've embedded in the head to our embedding.js. Another tip, if you're seeing issues when you're trying to do the embedding, take just the link out of this particular tag, so the bit that's in red, up to the first quotes, and then you have a URL which you can put into your browser. And if you see a load of text, a load of JavaScript appear, then that's a good sign. So that's kind of basically showing that you've got access to that JavaScript framework. So that's kind of just one quick troubleshooting tip. So the three areas in red are what we need to include within our web page. So we have our link to embedding.js. Now, depending on whether you're running within a Jet application, so let's say you're either using sort of basic Jet, the command line Jet, and you've built an application using that, or if you're using Visual Builder Cloud Service, VBCS, then you would change that standalone to Jet. If you're not using any of those technologies, you then can use the standalone reference to embedding.js. All right, the next main section is our reference to the project that we wish to embed. Now, if I go back to this, here we have the Oracle DV tag, and here we have the Oracle DV tag as you can see it within our code. So here we have the project path. And again, that's what you get from that previous developer menu option that I just showed you. And we also have a couple of other parameters. So the canvas that you wish to embed and the tab within there. So as you look within this developer UI, there are various other options. If you opened up these, you would see those properties that you can then just carry over onto your HTML page. And then at the bottom, we have some housekeeping. So I said that we are making use of knockouts, and these are all technologies that are used with the Oracle Jet framework. So what this is doing is basically saying, so we use require.js to say these are the components that are required, and then we apply the bindings, which is a knockout call. Now, you don't need to fully understand that. For this basic page, you basically copy this bit of JavaScript into your web page, and it should all work. So if you got into more sophisticated environments, then you may have for example, you may have a framework where the knockout bindings, so this kind of command is already there, so you may not need to include it again. So like I say, so then it gets a little bit more advanced, but for the basic use case, you just need to be able to copy and paste that into your web page. So how does it look? So this is what it looks like. So this is a kind of a view of the HTML page with our Oracle Analytics project embedded into it. So again, I keep calling it the Hello World example, but but it kind of is. And you know, that basic HTML that we saw, you can reference, you know, any kind of project that you have within your system, and it will then show up without any of the main Oracle Analytics product around it. So you're just seeing the project. One other thing while we're looking at this HTML, so depending on who you're sharing this application with, that you're doing the embedding, make sure that they can see that content. Or maybe if depending on where you have this content stored within the Oracle Analytics catalog. So for example, if it's in the shared, then that will give it the widest availability, and make sure that the appropriate application roles, so typically it would be the consumer role, has got access to that project. And then when the user goes to this web page or application and is authenticated, they will see that content as long as they've got access to it through those mechanisms that I just described. Now, the great thing about this embedded content is that it's not just like a static kind of web page. So you actually get a level of interactivity with this as well. So again, these are kind of screenshots that I have here. So I can click on the content and I can see all the similar brushing that I get within the main Oracle Analytics product. I can do sorting, I can do zooming, and I can do the keep and the remove operations as well. So that's all from within this embedded content. So here I'm just kind of running through some examples. I'm sorting that low to high. I also can optionally show a filter bar along the top. So here we have the year 2016 is already set as a filter, and you can see that I can add some additional filters within this UI. All right, so that's kind of, like I said, the Hello World. Now you can actually get more sophisticated with your design of your canvas, and we've seen a lot of tweets. You know, while we've been in this kind of lockdown mode, there's a lot of activity going on with social media of the examples that people are creating with Oracle Analytics, and all the various cool data stories that people are generating, and the various kind of creative designs that people are using with respect to color and how they're laying out their canvas. So here is another example of, here we have a single canvas that has been split up into tiles. We have some bar charts, and we have a line graph along the bottom. But again, this has just been referenced and embedded into a web page. And a bit later on, you'll be able to see this for yourselves. All right, so note that it's also possible to get a bit more sophisticated with that code. And for example, you could programmatically pass filters to the HTML Oracle DB tag that references that OAC project. And that's all within the product documentation, how you do that. So I'm not going to go through that right now, but you know, maybe a follow-on session, we could go into some more advanced examples of the things that you can do with Oracle embedding. Now, you can also make use of third-party frameworks for embedding your analytics content. And I've got a couple of examples of that. So here we have some cards that have got our Redwood theme in the back. But again, this is purely a custom web page application where we've embedded our references to the analytics content, and there's a customized user experience in terms of being able to view those visualizations. So here you can see, and again, it's all interactive, so I can drag the mouse over and do brushing, and I can click on here the narrative mode, and it will show me the narrative as it's automatically generated from Oracle Analytics. And this is probably the most sophisticated embedding application that we have, that we've kind of created at the moment. So again, we have customized look and feel. We have a navigation to different projects on the left-hand side, and we can collapse that navigation bar. And this is all built in a JavaScript framework called Materialize. So you can go off there, if you Google Materialize, and you'll see the various frameworks and examples that you can then kind of download. And by modifying the code that they provide, you can then build something like this for your own users. And again, as you can see, it's all kind of interactive in the same way that we have seen previously with the other embedding examples. All right, so let's talk about embedding into other Oracle developer tools. So the three that I'm going to talk about today are Oracle Jet, Visual Builder Cloud Service, VBCS, and Oracle Apex. Okay, so the first example is when you have basic Oracle Jet, maybe the command line distribution, and you have it installed locally or on a server, and you've also got Node.js set up as well, so that's a prerequisite for Jet. And what I'm just going to show you is how you can embed that Oracle Analytics content within, there's a template, a demo template that is shipped with Jet called NavDraw. So here we can see what that looks like, and I've embedded my Helloworld Oracle Analytics example into the dashboard tab. But each of these incidents and customers is all accessible and available to you as a developer to put your own content in there. And in order to do this, after you've deployed and installed Jet and you have set up this NavDraw template application, these are the changes that you need to make. So there are basically two changes that I've made. On the main index.html file, which you can find, so here we have the Jet main directory, and then OAC Embed is the Jet application that I've created using the NavDraw template. And then under the source directory, my index.html, here we have my link to embedding.js, and I've copied that at the bottom of that file, and you can see that I'm now using the Jet reference within that URL. So I'm not using standalone anymore, I'm using Jet because I'm using Jet. That's the first change. And then I've now navigated to the HTML page for the dashboard, and I've embedded my, my div tag along with my Oracle DB component. And this is my reference that we've seen a few times now with my link to the project path. Okay, one troubleshooting tip at this point. So what we used to see when embedding was first becoming popular is that 99% of the errors were around the cause configuration not being set up properly. So maybe people would have forgotten to put the safe domain reference within the Oracle Analytics service console. These days, what we're seeing is that people are not creating a suitable style within this div for the content. So they've done everything else right. They go to their web page, but they don't see anything. And in most cases that we're seeing recently, it's because they haven't generated a style which is suitable or large enough for the Oracle DB content to show up within. So that, again, just a kind of troubleshooting tip at this point while we're looking at some code. Okay, so some of you may be wondering, but what about the knockout bindings? So because Jet, because we use Jet, and this particular sample already has the require JS call as well as the applied bindings, we don't need to add anything to that. So again, that is all the changes that you need to make if you're building Jet applications. Now, if you're using VBCS, then here's an example of how embedded analytics looks within a VBCS application. And as you can see, it's very similar to Jet. So VBCS makes use of Jet, VBCS gives you that framework on top of Jet to build your own UI and applications. And we're currently working with the VBCS and Jet team on actually creating a component for VBCS to make it even easier to incorporate that content within those VBCS applications. So look out for that. We have something up and running, and we just need to do some fine tuning to make that available. Oracle Apex. So very popular development tool for creating applications, and you may have seen some of the stories in the press about how Oracle Apex has been used for creating applications to help in the fight against the COVID virus. It's pretty easy to embed into Oracle Apex as well. One of my colleagues within Oracle, Rasmus Edwards, has got a YouTube video, and if you kind of screenshot that reference, then you can take a look at his demo of how he's taken some content which incorporates some geospatial data and then incorporated that into an Oracle Apex application. Here we have a screenshot of my my Helloworld embed sample embedded into an Apex application, and I've got some screenshots here of what that looks like within the Apex development environment itself. So first of all, we need to look for our page that we've embedded into, and then on the right hand side of the IDE, then you'll see that we have some URLs which you can enter in on the JavaScript section. So this is where we would put our link to the embedding.js file. And then within our main div body, if you like, there we have a property called source, which is where we would put the reference to our project, our analytics project. And they're the two kind of main things that you need to include. And if you run that, you'll see your content embedded into Apex. And some people may think, well, Apex already has charts that I can show my data, which absolutely it does. And is one of the key reasons why it's such a successful framework for building applications. However, what Oracle Analytics provides is a next level in terms of those being able to do data modeling, being able to access multiple data sources, and create a more sophisticated analysis, perhaps using machine learning, which is built into Oracle Analytics, or some of the other key components and unique components within Oracle Analytics. And what this gives you is the ability to directly embed that content alongside your existing Apex visualizations and an application flow. So I think the combination of Oracle Analytics and Apex, or the combination of Oracle Analytics and VBCS/Jet, will give you a very powerful, interactive, highly visual application environment. So definitely, please, try this out if you are building applications using these technologies. Okay, so we've taken a look at how it's possible to embed analytic content into various environments, going from a simple HTML page all the way through to VBCS and Oracle Apex. But how do you log in to Oracle Analytics once you've done this embedding? So this is kind of a key part of the embedding story. So we have a number of options for authentication. Now, if speaking about Oracle Analytics Cloud within this scenario, so Oracle Analytics Cloud makes use of IDCS as an identity provider. Now, that identity provider can be federated to other identity providers, but essentially Oracle Analytics is very much tied to IDCS. So it all depends on how OAC and IDCS sit within your overall application environment and architecture. So the most simple would be that you just use IDCS for the analytics login. So for example, if you're building a simple web page, but you don't want people to go to the OAC product itself, but actually just access that content through a web page, then you could get them to log in. And I'll show you what the login prompt looks like. So this is good for development and testing purposes, but also for, like I said, the standalone custom application. So there's no additional authentication provider needed in this particular case. Now, the second example is where you may be using a third-party application and you can make use of something called three-legged authentication. And what that means is the third-party application in Oracle Analytics Cloud would need to make use of the same identity provider. So an example of three-legged that we've probably all used is when you go to a website for the first time and it says, would you like to log in using Google, or would you like to log in using Facebook? So that's essentially what three-legged authentication is. And what you may find is that either your custom application that you're building would need to be protected using IDCS, or the IDCS for OAC would need to be federated to use the same authentication provider as your custom application. So that's three-legged, and that's probably the most popular authentication mechanism that we have customers using today for embedding scenarios for OAC. And then the third one is what we call token-based authentication. And this is really good for custom applications where you may not want to use three-legged, but you want to have some form of authentication that perhaps runs behind the scenes. This is good for programmatic methods of authentication. And it's actually the method that you could use to generate a public access website which is showing content from Oracle Analytics. So this would give you the ability to automatically generate a token behind the scenes. If it is going to be on a public website, then our guidelines would be that the user that you're using for that authentication would be have minimal privileges. So they would definitely just be a consumer role within OAC. Any of the data that is in that OAC instance, you are happy for the public, the general public, to be able to see that data. So, you know, what particularly one sort of best practice could be that you have a separate instance for this particular use case if you wanted to show OAC data on a public website. But it is something that we know is very popular. It's something that we've been asked for a lot, and using token-based authentication will enable that use case. All right, so how do these things look? So the simple login page, this appears by default. So like I said, it's useful if you're doing demos or if you're doing development and testing, and you haven't yet wired up the authentication mechanism that you'll be using within a production environment. So the default prompt is Oracle Analytics login required. Click on login, and then it will give you the login prompt to put in your credentials for OAC. Those prompts are customizable. That's kind of what it looks like if the last diagram is too small on your screen. All right, so next, three-legged authentication. So again, I've already said earlier on when I introduced authentication that you need to make sure that the custom application and OAC effectively are using the same authentication mechanisms. How that happens, there's different ways of doing it architecturally, but they need to be using the same thing. And then you simply add this tag that you can see in red to the end of our embedding.js link, and we see put a question mark IDCS underscore OAuth three-legged equals true. And then in the apply bindings part of the code, you can see that we're just passing OAuth three-legged as a value into the application method set security config. And then token-based authentication. So this is possible using some APIs with IDCS that allow you to get a bearer token. It's up to the developer to obtain and protect that token as needed and as required by the sort of specifications of their application and the environment that they're working within. This is the doc reference to the kind of tokens that are needed for this embedding. So what we're generating are tokens using self-signed user and client assertions. And I'll talk about what that means in a moment. All right, so this is an example of a curl command, which is showing the parameters that are needed to generate these bearer tokens. So this is the API endpoint, and the type of information that you need to pass to it is URL encoded. That's good to know, because depending on if you do this programmatically, depending on what language you use to make that API call, you may have to encode that or not. So that's just something to be aware of. So for example, if you're using XML HTTP request within JavaScript, it will already do that URL encoding. But if you're using fetch, for example, then you actually have to do that URL encoding before you could make that fetch call within JavaScript. And then there's a couple of key parameters that you need to put into this API call. Now, the way that you do this, if I just go on and show you the overall process, and I'll come back to that API call so you can see where everything fits together. All right, so when Oracle Analytics Cloud is provisioned, there is by default, within IDCS, if you've ever looked into the IDCS console as an administrator, then you will see that you've got users and groups. Then you also have a tab called Applications. Now, when you provision Oracle Analytics, you'll see that there's an application within IDCS which is specific to your Oracle Analytics instance. Now, if you go to that instance, if you go to that application within IDCS, you will see that there's various tabs for configuration. You'll see a button on there that says Generate Token. Click on it, and you can then download a token. That is the kind of token that we'll use to be able to get this access into OAC. However, we need to generate that token programmatically for it to actually be of any kind of use, really, within a real-world scenario. So what we would then need to do is actually create a proxy application within IDCS. So you create a new custom IDCS application to use that as a proxy for your OAC application. Okay, so then using something like OpenSSL, you can generate a self-signed key pair, which is used for signing the client and user JOT assertions that we are going to call, which we're going to pass to the IDCS API. You would then register your public key that you've created with IDCS. So there's a place where you can upload that and you get an alias. Make a note of the custom application client ID, because that's later used again within the code for generating the signed JOT assertions. You'd write some code. We've got guidelines that we'll be publishing in the next round of documentation, which is kind of due sometime within the next kind of month or so, which kind of gives you guidelines on how to generate that code. So you can use whatever language you like, as long as they've got the appropriate encryption algorithms. So I've used JavaScript. I think people have used Python. I've seen people use Ruby on Rails, and you can certainly use Java. So as long as you've got access to those specific encryption kind of methods, then you can use that code. And I'll be blogging some sample code on how you can actually do this with Java. And then what you're doing is you're going to use those client and user assertions in the IDCS API call to basically just get a bearer token, and which is a really long string of characters which you can then pass into the embedding code for OAC. All right, so if I go back to the example of the API call, so what you can see is that we have the grant type. So this is a JOT bearer, and this is simply copy and paste that. The scope is something that comes from that custom application that you're generating within IDCS. And when you get the documentation, you'll see that you essentially take your existing OAC IDCS application that was created when the OAC instance was provisioned, and you reference that as the scope for your custom application. And then you make a note of that because you're going to be using that within the API call. Here's the client ID that I mentioned. So this again is the client ID of your IDCS custom application. The client assertion type, again, that's a copy and paste, so it's JOT bearer. And then we have the data assertion and the client assertion. And these are tokens that you would then generate programmatically before you make the call. Okay, so something that's kind of pretty neat, and something that's very important, is that the code that you've got, which calls that IDCS API, needs to happen on the server. So as you can see, there's a number of fairly sensitive bits of information that we're using when we make that call to the IDCS API. So it's important that that happens on a protected server. And what is very neat is that you could use the Oracle Functions service and the Oracle API Gateway to help you generate the tokens. Here's an example of how that would look. So on the client here, we've got an example of somebody accessing a custom application, which is being hosted on a server somewhere with a website. And there's a custom application or website with embedded OAC content. Now that HTML is making a call then to this API, which is running on the API Gateway. Behind the API Gateway, we're using an Oracle function, and that script is generating those JOS assertions. Now you could be passing a user ID into that script because you want to be able to authenticate as that user ID and get a token for that user and only see the data that that user is entitled to see. So that function service, and this could be whatever, you could run this on Java, you could be running Python, or you don't need to use the Oracle function service in the API Gateway. If you're a developer who is very proficient in setting up your own APIs, then absolutely, you can do it that way as well. But what's key is that this code runs on a protected server. That code then calls the IDCS confidential app API to get that token, and it passes it back through to the client, and you are then authenticated and you get to see the content. Okay, so let's have a look at the configuration that's required, first of all, for the token-based authentication. So here we can see, again, we've got our embedding.js link, and here we're using $token equals true. Here we have an example of the code that we would be using for the embed. So at the top, we've got a reference to the API endpoint to get the token. We're using XML HTTP request to call that endpoint. And what's returned is a JSON object, which includes the access token. So we're parsing that return JSON into the IDCS token variable, and we're basically just accessing the access underscore token property of that JSON. And then we have some additional config here, and we've returned the IDCS token as part of that set security function. So, that's kind of it. It's a little bit more complicated in terms of the code that's required, but again, you can use this sample code within your own applications, and as long as you've got an API somewhere to get that token in a secure manner, then you can then pass that token into our set security config method, and you're authenticated. So okay, so yeah, you can try this out. So if you're an Oracle employee and you're on Oracle VPN, then this won't work at the moment with this IP. If you're not on Oracle VPN, then take a screenshot, make a note of this IP address, put it into your browser, and then what you should see is one of the examples that I showed earlier should kind of pop up on your screen. Now, some things to be aware of. The first time, if you're the first person to hit this, then there'll be a little bit of a warm-up time while the function service warms up and generates the token. So that will give you a little bit of a lag, but just for the first time. I hear that on their roadmap, there's a way, there will be a way to keep functions warm at some point. If you're running on a mobile device and you put this URL into a mobile device, if you're on Apple, if you're on iOS, then you may see an error or a warning because your Safari browser has got, again, some protection, and you would just need to turn off cross-site to be able to see that appear. If you're on Android or if you're using Firefox, then you should see that appear okay. So to try it out, and let's just to see what you see. But what's important here is that this is an example of being able to see content from Oracle Analytics in a public way. Yeah. So what's happening in the background is that you're connecting to a web page, that web page is then making a call to the API gateway, which is running in the cloud. That API gateway is sitting on top of an Oracle function, which is using JavaScript to get those that token from IDCS, which is then being passed back all the way to your browser, and you're authenticating as a user within OAC. So that using that model, you would then potentially be able to set up a public website showing data. And I know that that's kind of a very popular request, especially with government type websites where they want to make data public. And especially in this sort of time that we're in at the moment, there's definitely a demand for people to share data publicly that is relevant to the situation that we're in. Okay, so in the last part of the session, I'm going to talk a bit about troubleshooting. So I said safe domains is pretty much the issue 99% of the time. And on the right-hand side, you can see we have the safe domains page. And here I've entered in my various domains that I've been using for applications and demos. Something to note is even if you're, as I said, using a local host for development testing purposes, you need to enter that into that safe domains as well. So you can see I've got a couple of examples here. I've got localhost, and I'm also using 127.0.0.1, which is a typical IP address that's used for a localhost reference. Using the browser dev tools, as I mentioned at the start of the session, can be very useful to help you troubleshoot. Certainly the console will give you errors warnings, and the network tabs as well will kind of give you any idea of if there's any kind of networking connectivity kind of issue, and you can see something like the headers and what's being returned for various API calls as well within the network tab. So they're kind of really useful to get to know if you're going to get into development with Oracle Analytics embedding. And again, just to reiterate, make sure that the script that you're using resolves. Okay, if it doesn't resolve, then the embedding won't work. But if it does, then that's a good sign, and the issue, if you're having one, is likely to be somewhere else. All right, again, check that the project that you're embedding is accessible to the people who are your target audience. Make sure that they have the right role access, and make sure that you've got a suitably defined style within your HTML. So this is again something that we've seen more of recently, is more people have started to do the embedding. They may not be including a style, even though everything else works. When they go to the web page, they don't see anything, and what's happening is that essentially the content is hidden. So they need to have a style suitable for that div tag where they're putting their embedded Oracle Analytics content. Just one other thing to sort of mention really is that look out for CSS conflicts. So if you've designed an application, you're using CSS, or maybe you're using a framework, and something doesn't quite appear as you expected, then look out for any conflicts within, perhaps like the CSS classes that you have within there. Sometimes people may be using this kind of important tag, and what that will do is it will kind of override any other CSS references for some of your elements within the page. So that's kind of just a couple of things to help you with troubleshooting. In terms of where you can get more information on this, so I have a blog that I'm kind of getting around to writing various entries on there. The embedding is relatively new within the product. It's kind of about a year or so old. We're starting to see a lot of interest now with people wanting to embed Oracle Analytics content into various places. So on this blog, I have the Helloworld example, as well as a separate blog entry on the troubleshooting aspect. So if you go to that blog, that should be good information combined with the doc link that we have within the Oracle Analytics product doc to get you up and running. And we also have content available on the Oracle Analytics YouTube channel. And I've got a massive backlog of content to to write in this area to help people get up and running and using the various facilities that are there for embedding. So thank you for attending, and I will take some questions in the last 10 minutes or so. Where do I see the questions, Gianni?
You must have a Q&A button somewhere. There are no questions written there, but I have one for you.
Okay.
If you can go back just a few slides, the one with the safe domain, you have a screenshot on the top right corner, which is extremely small, and they were asking if you could just zoom into that screenshot of the safe domains.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that little screenshot there.
Yeah, I can't actually zoom it, I don't think, without breaking stuff. Is there a way I can do that, do you know? Or?
Honestly, the only way that crossed my mind is going out of presentation mode and just stretch it in PowerPoint itself. But yeah, it's not really the best.
Oh, that's cool. I can do that.
Well, you can zoom your. Everybody can zoom their own zoom display. So on the top you got the view options, and then you can say zoom.
Oh.
I'll show it live. I'll just log into OAC and then show it live.
That's also plan B.
All right. Okay, so here we have OAC, and this is my homepage within OAC. Top left-hand side, you get your menu items, and then we're looking at the console, and then we're going to go to safe domains, and this is where we put in our entries for the domains that we wish to.
The question will come, can you zoom your browser a bit?
Oh, okay.
I mean, I can see it, but I can easily imagine that not everybody will have the same amount of pixels. Oh, awesome, thank you.
How's that? So for embedding, you just need to put a tick in the final checkbox. So the other use cases that this is used for is if you're taking content from external web pages. So for example, you may want to reference an image that you're accessing on a URL within your project. You would then put the URL for that image and you click image. So these are the different options that safe domains is used for, and this is all related to the cause topic that I mentioned. Hopefully everyone was able to see the dark theme that I showed. Let me just see if I can give a demo of what that would look like. Nothing ever works, does it, when you're on a... Yeah, here we go. No? All right, not that then. Shopping for my daughter. I will bring it up.
No need to justify anything.
Okay. Right, here we go. Right, here we have the link. Now, hopefully this worked for those of you on the call who tried this, but this is an example of just publishing an OAC project publicly. So that's the URL that I had in the presentation, and you can see that this is all interactive, so I can do sorting, low to high, and I have the usual kind of brushing around here. So obviously there's not much that's showing, but yeah, so this is, like I said, it's something that we've been asked for a lot, and we kind of realized that this mechanism did allow us to do this. So if anyone's interested in doing this, let me know, and I'll help you get this set up, because the first time that you go through the token generation, there's a number of steps that you need to get up to speed with. So there's a bit of a learning curve, but once you've done it once, it's definitely worth it, because it's very powerful, and it kind of enables an awful lot of use cases within Oracle Analytics. The other one that I showed you, which I've got set up dangerously, is this one. So again, this is still live. This is using a materialize sample application, if you like, which you can download the template and then build it out yourself. So again, this is all interactive. So this is going to different projects. These links will click back and show, you know, different embedded projects, go back to the main dashboard. And yeah, so very, very powerful, very flexible, and you can have, you know, customized user experiences as well. Okay, so any other questions?
I have one, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So all of these things are about DV, so the new interface, the self-service, data visualization, and so on interface. All the answers, I will say interface of with dashboards and analysis, cannot use these things. I mean, I guess you said already in another presentation that this is clearly only for DV. You cannot include, you cannot embed answers on dashboards in this way. Is
Correct.
there any plan to fix it? Because since like maybe OBI 10, but at least 11 for sure, there is the web service that has the HTML view service that gives you the get HTML for reporter, set bridge. So you have web services calls that give you full block of JavaScript that allow you to embed into a third-party web application a full OBI page that you can even build dynamically by injecting your own XML code for analysis or just linking to analysis existing on your catalog. So is there a way to, or I mean, do you have a plan maybe to port or to extend the authentication by token to that kind of the part so the existing web service could be compatible with this approach instead of having to go through authentication to the web service and so on?
No, not at the moment. So, so at the moment, because the code that is running the DV is based on the JET framework, then that is heavily dependent on that for the kind of use cases that I'm showing in this case. However, you know, it's possible that I'm kind of thinking through in the back of my mind whether any of those three-legged authentication options might work, but I don't think so. So I'm not aware of what's possible with answers and dashboards for embedding because my focus is on this DV side of embedding.
Yeah.
So whatever way, because obviously you're still authenticating if you're using Oracle Analytics Cloud for a dashboard with answers or dashboards with IDCS. So whatever methods are available for authenticating or federating with IDCS will still be relevant there. But what we're kind of doing is taking that component out of OAC in this kind of JET framework, and then we're passing that authentication through that web component. So that is quite different in the way that those two kind of objects are built. And as you described, there's capabilities on that side which we don't yet have on the DV side. And it's kind of, yeah, so it's different. And at the moment, I don't see those two joining in the middle, as it were, at the moment.
Okay, and so there is a question from Alan. He would like to know, what about advanced embedding in answers dashboard? And I mean, not just showing us like a static picture of a DB project, but he would like to have the prompts and all the interactions going on, apparently.
So I don't quite understand the question. Are you saying that you'd like to be able to see the same kind of filtery type interactions within this type of embedding, or are you saying?
I mean, the way I understand it, so Alan, feel free to just keep adding pieces to the question, is you would like to get a DB project embedded in a dashboard, a classical dashboard, and be able to easily have like dashboard prompts to set values that are sent back to the DB project, and then you can, we say, filter the DB project based on the dashboard prompt and so on. That's how I understand it, at least.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that you can do today. So you could have some kind of filtering within your embedded application, and you can create new filters. That's one way of doing it. On our product roadmap, we have a filter on canvas filter box. So that would give you a very similar dashboarding experience where you would have an area of the canvas where you could click what filters you needed in the same kind of way that you can do today with dashboards. So that's definitely on the roadmap.
Okay, so just extending his question because I can see it coming, I guess. There is not a simple way to just say this dashboard prompt must set this value for the DV filter that is there inside. There is not a simple way to just link a dashboard prompt with that DV filter that you already have on your DV project.
So, okay, so depending on how you wish to do this, I'm just going to show you an example of how you can code filters. All right, so here we have a HTML page, and we are looking at similar sort of example to what we've been looking at for the rest of the session, but I've got a JavaScript variable which I can then pass programmatically into my project. And here we're using so this is a little bit more sophisticated code, but essentially they're all using knockout observables into the Oracle DB. And here I have a filter on a column. So I can programmatically add filters and pass those into my visualization. So if you wished, you could do that today. You could have some kind of array which is fronted with a JavaScript, and then that JavaScript will pass whatever values you want into your project. So there's kind of ways of doing that today.
Yeah. And so I can see how you can link a dashboard prompt that set those values and interact with this JavaScript part to pass values in DV. So I would say it makes sense and it will work.
Okay. All right, looks like we're at the top of the hour or just after.
Yeah.
So thank you again for inviting me to speak. And those of you who attended, again, thanks for sticking around and listening to this session.
Thanks so much, Mike.